there's some questions at the end. If there are no questions, we leave early, but you can kind of ask questions as we talk. If you're asking me questions as we talk, it's still my train of thought. That's your fault, basically. But we will try and answer all the questions. Some of the answers we give you will be correct, which is always good. You won't know if they're not, will you? Really. If I just go, 14% of this, you're going to go, yeah, you won't have just made up the top of your head. Yes, you will. Because I'm not a DFT analyst, so I don't worry about being really accurate about everything and making sure we make decisions based on analysis of data and so forth. Right, so let's go back to the title page there, intersex awareness. Brought to you in Sesame Street fashion by the letters LGBT and the numerical, the mathematical symbol plus the agenda network. You see our banners, very good banners that we invested money into, probably your money, which is excellent. And you'll see our new logo. And I was hoping, for those of you who are in our LGBT network, excellent. If you're not in our LGBT plus and allies network, why not? Why not? Come on, 21st century. And if you do join our network and attend such events such as these, you can, and this is such amazing timing, if you're both in our network and you attend events, you can be eligible for one of our LGBT laptop stickers. You literally just walked in the door.
Sorry guys, Brexit in life.
Okay, we don't know what Brexit is. Okay, fine. And to all those who are watching on live stream, hello. It does feel a bit like Open University. I can see myself there. Luckily, I'm very thick-skinned. I'm not really self-conscious at all. So I apologise in advance for the fact that we're going to be talking about, sex, sexuality. I did say we talk about body parts. I did that in a salacious way to get people to come. Why not? There. So, we might mention penis, vagina. We could even talk about clitoris, possibly internal stuff as well. There. I just said them now, haven't I? So to get all the done. We'll slot them in. Now you want me to talk about them. Right. So for those who missed that, so that's the plan for the day. And the first thing is, before we go on to anything else, so I'm quite hungry. What is this? What is this? Come on, some people know what this is. You grew up in the UK. Hello. It's a gingerbread man, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. No, this is a gingerbread woman. This is the gingerbread man. Can you tell the difference? Oh, okay, fine. I'm going to come on to gingerbread in a minute there, and afterwards I will eat these. Based on his name, based on where he's from, he's called Greg. That's Gregorina. I actually swapped them over if you didn't notice. So you swap the genders. That's what I did. You didn't swap it. Transgender gingerbread. If I ask you a question, a really difficult one, and somebody gets the answer right, you could get a gingerbread as a prize, as touched by human hands. Right, okay, let's go on to talk about gingerbread. However, there's a thing called the genderbread person. Now, I quite like this. I was introduced to this, I've done quite a lot of these talks. I was introduced a while ago because really it's about understanding, before we get into some details about transgender issues, there are some basic things that people need to think about when they think about gender and men and women. And one of the things to think about is, put your hands up if you consider yourself to be a man. Okay, right. So, gentleman over there, my nearest one, why do you think you're a man?
I grew up as a man.
You grew up as a man. What does that mean?
I was raised.
Were you told you were a man?
Yes.
Was it, yes, was it assumed? Okay, and possibly when you were born, this is the thing, a doctor or midwife would have got a certificate and filled in the section for your sex or gender and put male. Yeah, that's what they would have done. And they would have based that not on how you perceive yourself, but what would they have based that on generally? They would have based that on what organs?
Visible external
Right, see, before, they might have based it on the fact that they might have seen a little winky. Okay? They might have done, perhaps they didn't. Plus, he saw a big winky, who knows? Either way, male was put there. Okay? And if they'd seen other things, they might have said female there, and then the parents would have taken you home and would have ensured that you might have had cars and action men and so forth. I've shown my age now, because action men probably died out in the 90s stuff. You know, so any of the cultural references I give out in this talk, some of you with grey hair like me, or no hair, will get those cultural references, and the other of you will go, no, what's this all about? I don't know what that is. And be on your phones. Because modern generations are rubbish. That's why. Says a parent. Right. So the gendered person says, actually, there's 4 things about you that are around that kind of gendered thing. The most important, arguably, that makes you a man is your brain. Probably says you're a man. Every day probably says you're a man. Now, you know, what does that mean? Well, a lot of that can be how society perceives you. So a lot of issues relate to come in when your own director sneaks in a bit late. who is also our straight ally on the LGBT plus network there, and has one of these stickers I mentioned earlier. Thanks for coming. My job is to make senior civil servants feel uncomfortable. That's my job. That's why I can't get into the senior civil service. I will never learn. Fine. So we talk about identity in your head, expression. Now, when we talk about gender and identity, society and society's view of gender roles has things that are masculine. So male type clothing, male type behaviour, male type jobs, and all those things. Now that's all society deciding that, because in other societies and cultures that aren't the Western we've grown up in, they have different cultures and societies and different things that decide what is male or female behaviour, not the same as we've grown up with. So society can do things differently in different parts of the world. And history, you know, historically, what would make a man or a woman might have been different behaviours and so forth. And we don't know what they were doing in Neolithic times. Well, they would have had their own things, or not. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they saw everybody as just a member of the tribe. And some people did some things and gave birth, and some people did the same things and didn't give birth, and that's all they cared about. Who knows? You know, they wouldn't have enough cloth necessarily to make lots of different types of clothing, you know, although being eaten by saber-toothed tigers. So we don't know. The third thing on there is attraction, which is this whole heart thing, this love, attraction. Because attraction and love obviously are the same thing. So that's, of course, who you like. So the difference between gender, transgender, and sexual orientation, as the sentence somebody said a while is, you know, my gender is who I am, my sexual orientation is who I fancy. That's how we're doing that. Okay? But there are those people who don't fancy anybody, of course, in society now, and we recognise that. So you don't have to fancy anybody. Okay? You met my wife, you don't stand. You should have left at that. That's terrible. I'll tell her. I won't tell her. She doesn't like me talking at home, so I don't speak. And then finally, we're back down to somebody's favourite part there, the bits. The bits there that the doctor says there's a penis, so it must be male, there's a vagina, must be female. And related to that, the bits you can see, but also the internal bits that are assumed to be there. You know, when the doctor or midwife says, oh, that's a man, there's an assumption made about that as well. But what makes a man, potentially, is, for me and many people, is what's in your head. It's not necessarily. So if you wear masculine type clothing, that does not make you a man, does it? Really? So, you know, and if you decide to wear a very nice skirt and high-heeled shoes, that does not make you a woman, does it? Because that's just clothing. That's just putting on things you want. And if you work in certain jobs, you know, historically, if you wanted to work in the immigration service, in the 1960s, you were a man, because that was a man's job. It didn't stop being a man's job until 1973, if I remember correctly, when women were first allowed stamp passports, because obviously it requires masculine skills to stamp passports. So what you've got there is this concept now. Now, for every individual, those four things can not be a normal sequence. So for most people, this is the problem society has, what happens is they go, well, Bob's a man, he thinks like a man, he's been told he's a man since he's born, and Bob dresses like a man, and he's got a man type job, you know, whatever that is. He's a fireman, and he's got a penis, and he fancies girls. Okay, now that accounts for a large section of society, absolutely. However, you can now vary that, can't you? Because Bob's a man, thinks he's a man, but actually he does prefer to wear feminine type clothing, not masculine type clothing. He does have a penis, however, but he fancies guys. So that's a variation, isn't there? Now, imagine how many variations you can put on that, really. And all of those variations and an absence of some of those can apply to human beings. Okay? So if I can blow your minds, the concept of gender is you have men and women, and what that's based on, actually, it's a mix of lots of things. A lot of it's society saying who and what a man is, and mostly it's about what you think you are. If you think you're a man, you're a man. You're a man who likes men, a man who likes women, a man who likes high heels, a man who likes flats, a man who likes Dr. Martens. You could be a woman who likes women, who has a vagina, but likes wearing men's clothing, masculine type clothing, especially with men. Because obviously, you know, clothing is, you know, optional for everybody, isn't it? That's your realist, in which case it's very optional. So what the gender person tries to show you is we're a mix of things. And the concept of Bob is a man, dresses like a man, has a penis and likes women, certainly applies to lots of people, but not everybody. And you get all that variation. So when we talk about intersex and transgender, that's all normal, natural, based on those facts, based on those four things, but they don't all have to be A follows B, follows C, follows D. Now, if you're one of those people where it all does, that's great. But for lots of people in society, that's not necessarily the same. A might follow B, might follow F, might follow X. Okay, and that's how you've got to think about it. Okay, so we have this issue ahead, so you have men and women. And what we have, if you're in the transgender world in particular, is there are some people in society who assume, when they talk about transgender, for instance, that a man will one day, say at the age of 35, say to people, you know, I'm transitioning, be a woman. Okay? Now, that entire sentence that I've said there, potentially, is wrong, because Bob isn't choosing to do that. He's choosing to tell people that he's transitioning, but what Bob is doing is Bob is actually becoming the person Bob has always been. Bob's brain potentially has always been a woman's brain. It's just that he was born with a penis. So you've got to decide for Bob what makes Bob a man. Is it the structure, the sexual organs, or is it the brain? A lot of us think it must be the brain because the penis can't think. Lots of women would argue that men do a lot of thinking with their penises, and anatomically, they'd be wrong. Okay, just saying. Whispering. So it's important to realise that these are different things. They are not all connected in a sequence. And the fact that somebody has one that is out of kilter with lots of people in society should not be a big deal, but is, because we still have these narrow views of things, and we need to educate teach ourselves about those things, and that's why you're all here today. So well done to you for coming to learn about this. So next thing we'll talk about is much more the transgender thing. So you don't choose to be transgender. Nobody decides this. Now, the reason you wouldn't choose this, and I'm a parent of a transgender son, is it's kind of like, I'm saying, I was trying to think of an analogy where people would go, I shouldn't have said that. And lots of times I say things, people do that pretty much all the time, everywhere, on every occasion. I can't help it. They go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Or what I like is when they go and say Grant being wrong, the Homer Simpson factor, I call it. Because if you do it enough, you get away with it, generally, that other people can't. I've given my secrets away now. So you don't choose to be transgender. So what you've got is, so my son, Matthew, his brain says he's a man. However, for the first 14 years of his life, his outward expression was of a annoying girl. Actually, very lovely girl, quiet, girly girl. And the bits and pieces were a vagina. The attraction part was non-existent. As far as we know, non-existent. No concept there for him. But when at 14, he said, actually, I actually think I'm a boy. His brain was recognizing the fact that the way we brought him up, arguably, or the way society perceived him, is there was a disconnect between his brain, his outward expression, and his bits. But we've already talked about the fact that that's okay. They don't have to be A follows B follows C follows D. So him telling us this meant, obviously, there needs to be some changes. So the outward expression can change from feminine type clothes, dresses, to masculine clothing, jeans, shirts, and so forth. There, I have to say, really bad taste in clothing for my child. But I think that's the thing, you see. I think if you grow up, with the right brain body mix as a boy, by the time you get 14, you know what to wear as a boy. But if you suddenly start wearing as a boy when you're 15, you've never done it before, you go through an experimental phase to decide what look suits you. A lot of them, they don't. That's what I said. As a supportive parent, what do you look like?
That's just teenagers, though.
It is teenagers, yes. Thank you for that. As regards the attraction, he's now 23. Actually, possibly still no attraction. So I do not know whether he likes girls, or he likes boys, or he likes both, or he likes none at all. I've never spoken to him directly about it because none of my business. So I'm hoping if he does like people, he'll find somebody he likes there that, I'd be comfortable with having dinner with and not like paying them up. I like my daughter, who, going out with somebody who we haven't really gelled, who by coincidence is also a transgender boy. I remember Christmas dinner, me being the crass person that I am, I cooked Christmas dinner. It was my wife, myself, my transgender son, my daughter, and her transgender boyfriend. So it was 5 of us on the table. And I said, it's quite funny. I said, 5 of us around the table for dinner, 3 blokes, 2 ladies, 1 cock. And my wife said, yes, Steve, we know who the cock is. Oh, it was quite good. And I had my wife to enter with that zinger at the end. It was probably my place. The thing about, though, being transgender, and when you don't choose it, is, and the reason that it can be triggered, particularly people when they're 14, that's when your body kind of rebels against you. Because most kids, up until that age, or before puberty, from a distance, boys and girls they look similar on the beach, generally. So very young kids sometimes will wear just your bottoms on the beach, and you can't tell, there's no boobs developing, So it's only when puberty hits that the bodies of people can start to change. That's when it's a lot of people who are transgender to suddenly go, my brain and the way my body is, something is wrong. Something is terribly wrong, and I don't know what it is. And it can take some people a long time to figure out what the unhappiness is. Some people might never figure it out, actually. Possibly, I've thought about that. Some people might go, it's these boobs, they're wrong. I shouldn't have these. And where there should be something, there's vagina, where's the penis? And their brain might go, ooh, something is wrong. And they'll hopefully tell people, and they'll be as supportive as me. And society. But a lot of people don't, obviously, and will go through their 20s and their 30s into their 40s, and they don't say anything, because if they told people, then they would be perhaps ridiculed and abused in the street and receive violence. They might find they might lose their job. If they're married, they might lose their partner. If they've got kids, they could lose access to their children. Their families might disown them, and they could find themselves alone and ridiculed. That happens to transgender people all the time. It's happening now as we speak to people, because nobody can kind of cope with the concept that gender isn't A follows B follows C follows D. So when people still use the word choice with transgender, I always go, what? That's like somebody seeing a path and seeing a bed of nails and going, well, I will walk down the path, but I choose to go across that bed of nails without my shoes on because I'm clearly sadomasochistic. Nobody, sadomasochists would choose that. Fair enough, each their own. But most people do not choose that path. They would choose an easier path in their life. As a parent of a transgender child, I would rather my child has an easier path, but the path is difficult. So nobody chooses it. Okay, so when you hear on the radio and Piers Morgan and other people on these videos, YouTube's very big, and certain American Republicans go on about this thing about people, a man can't be a woman. A transgender woman who was born with a male body didn't go choose that body. Their brain has always been a woman's brain in what I say is the inappropriate vessel. And all they're doing is putting that right. So they're not choosing to be a woman. They are merely now showing the world what they have always been. That's how it has to be. And that's how you have to think about it. And we need to educate everybody. And we'll talk later about champions, but you are now, obviously, because you've heard me talk about this, all now champions, because you've all got families and friends, you go to the pub. When people talk about these things, you will be able to say, choice, that's bollocks. I said before about firefights, didn't I? That's bollocks. It's not about choice. That's ridiculous. Because you're just assuming that if you've got a penis, you must be a man. That's the thing. If you've got a penis, you must fancy women. If you've got a penis, you must wear jeans. All those things are not true. So gender dysphoria is a huge problem. Now, with my child, what that meant was, and we didn't notice this because we're such good parents, what that meant was no eating to make sure the body stayed really skinny, so the boobs would stay small. We didn't notice because when you live with somebody, you see them every day, you don't notice the fact that somebody says to you, like when they're 16, Matilda's looking a bit skinny. You go, are they? We'll call him Matthew, but no. And we're like, is that low? Is that bad? He says, yes, you can. Yeah, and so when go to the doctors, and they go, 40 things. So you've got to get more food and increase the antidepressants. So that dysphoria is real. So the reason you need to know about that is one of the things that drives people to transition is that dysphoria. Because you can't live with that. And lots of people don't live with that, which is why, particularly with their teenagers, they will try and kill themselves. A huge amount. 50% of all transgender children under the age of 18 will at some point try and commit suicide, regardless of how much support they have, because it's in their heads and the body, and you can't really fight that. So they need as much support as they can. A lot of people will kill themselves, which of course is horrible statistically, because the chances, if you're a man, of killing yourself is 1 in 6,500 in the UK. So 1 in 2 is huge if you think about it statistically. Okay, that's dysphoria. So I've talked about this. He says estimated to be 0.6 to 1% of the population. I think that's not necessarily what I would call true transgender people. I think 0.6 is probably more accurate. And when I say to people about this is, clearly, what has happened is we know that it's an issue between the brain and the body. People aren't choosing to be transgender, they're born where there is a disconnect between the brain and body. That is what I would call a malfunction. But you'd expect it to be rare. So you'd expect it to be a low number, which is why there aren't loads and loads of transgender people, but there is a small minority of transgender people. Such a small minority, of course, it's very difficult for them to get support, be recognised, and very difficult in society to cope with them, because a lot of people, you guys potentially will go through your entire lives without actually knowing a transgender person or working with a transgender person or having a friend who's a transgender person. So it's very difficult to talk about these things when people only see it in the media, because you don't know it yourself. Once you've met a transgender person and you realise they're just a person, then it kind of helps. But for a lot of people, they don't. If you actually know in your family or a close friend or somebody you work with, somebody who is transgender, put your hand up. It's amazing. It's huge numbers, isn't it? Because when I've done that in certain places, admittedly it was Bristol. I said that. A room full of people, nobody. I think it's because all the trans people run away to London. That's what it is. So, double genitalia and sexual orientation obviously is not sex gender identity. Remember, we know this, yeah. So you're transgender. That's one issue you've got, but you can love anybody or everybody or nobody. Okay, it's a different thing. So, much of the time. Okay, non-binary. Now this is interesting. Non-binary. Have you heard of people who are non-binary? I think it's hit the zeitgeist in the last 3 to 5 years. I think before that, it says to me 10 years ago, non-binary, they'd gone, I did maths at school. We never did non-binary maths, I think. But now, when you say non-binary, I think there's enough social media stuff around that, and people might know people who are non-binary around. Non-binary is interesting because when you've got somebody who's non-binary, it's not the same as necessarily being transgender as I described it. Brain and vessel not matching up. Non-binary, very much in the brain. It's here and kind of works both ways. And so non-binary, some non-binary people can feel that they are both male and female. The brain's telling them two things at the same time. Now, obviously, if they're men, my wife would say most men can't think of two things at the same time. But yes, they must actually be thinking these things. I do not, as not a non-binary person, understand how their brains operate. But to be fair, I don't understand how my brain operates, really, the things I say, behave. So when I talk about this, for me, it's very difficult. So, for those of you in this room who are aware, in the new year, I'm going to be doing talking presentation and guest speakers on being non-binary. So our focus is intersex, but non-binary is very interesting, and I've met people who are non-binary, and they're part of our agenda network. And for me, I'm thinking that when I speak to somebody who's non-binary, my brain, which is still a Western male brain for my life, still looks at people, and my brain still goes, is that a man or a woman? And if there's somebody even transgender, I will go, oh, I see a woman. I think they're a transgender woman. When I go to committee meetings and things for agenda, because you can't stop your brain thinking about these things. With a non-binary person, I'm like, okay, you are Peter today, but yesterday when I met you, you were Jane. Yes, okay. But the view is obviously that that's their brain, and they're just choosing to do that. They're not choosing to mess people around. I know I'll have a funny game with people, or I will change my gender every other day. It's entirely valid that their brain thinks that way, and in the same way that it's entirely valid for you to think that you are a man, because you are a man. What's in your head and in mine, that's valid. Somebody came into the room and said, for you said you're a man, and said, that you can't be right. That's not right. That's not a valid thing for you to be. You go, hang on a minute. Yes, it is. That's the same for non-binary people. Because otherwise, you're just judging that your thought processes don't account to can't be real, but my thought processes of how I see myself can be. Well, that's ridiculous. So they exist, and presumably, for genetic reasons, always existed. possibly without definition, and have lived and had relationships and had children. The reason I say have children is if a lot of this stuff is genetic and getting passed down, people would have to have children, or else things would stop existing in the gene pool. I only say that because I did molecular biology as a degree in genetic engineering. So it's very interesting, and we do need to learn more about it, and we don't know much about it. And I think because it's kind of so new, there's hardly any real scientific studies into transgender. They're doing some gene work now, doing some endocrinology work, and there are still some medical professionals who think that transgender people are choosing. Non-binary is a bit further down the road of how does that work? Because a lot of it must be how the brain is wired. Then intersex. Now I'm not going to talk too much about intersex because Emma, who's before our chair, is intersex, and I brought her here specifically to talk about herself, as we said. But intersex is the thing that proves that that gender-bred person that I talked about before is right. Because there are, there's some questions somewhere this thing. I thought there were 18 intersex conditions. I'm told there were 40 intersex conditions. Variations. Yes, you see, I'm not the expert, as I said. There is. So I dare say, yes, variations. Not a medical condition. Yeah. I'm not a doctor. I didn't get voted last time when I said I was a doctor. They chased me out of the building. So 40 different types. Now, when I did some research on that, there are some interesting variations that are so, I didn't understand them because there's such a spectrum of variations to do with physical, external, physical, internal characteristics, genetics of people. The one that was the most interesting to me was there is a condition called aphalia or aphalia, APHALLIA. That is a person who is born entirely with the genetics and physical makeup of a man, the male in all regards, but without a penis. I was like, wow, just no penis. Yeah, testicles, internals, brain of a man. So Bob, as a man, going out with a lady he likes, dressing as a man, but his sexual bits are no penis. He's not transgender, is he? He's actually just no penis. And there's so many of these conditions around. So it kind of shows that when people go, oh, well, you must be a man, you've got a penis. Actually not. You can be a man in both brain and body, more or less, but not be born with a penis. Who knew? You do now. Okay? And there's lots of these other variations that have always been around to do with mutations and genetics and so forth. And they form a big part of the population. Far more intersex people in society than transgender people. The statistic that we've been using in agenda is as many intersex people in society as genuine redheads. Yeah, that makes me go, oh, maybe. I know people with ginger hair. Yes. So, but they're not all in Scotland. So who knows what's going to happen post-Brexit. But either way, we'll still have ginger people in England, I'm sure. So 2% of the population of the world, which is quite a big, substantial thing. So my view is that whilst you might not know, people might know a transgender person, they probably do know an intersex person, but they just don't know they're intersex. And the intersex community, and I'm going to talk about, it's a whole raft of issues and concerns that we have in society for people who are intersex. That's why I've all brought you all here today talking about that. But very quickly, just to go back to the main topic there, this is just a few things. I've got like 3 or 4 minutes to talk about inclusive civil service. Obviously, we had that big debate, didn't we, online about the toilets in this building when they redo them there. Obviously, that conversation online, or people saying they didn't want those kind of facilities, superloos and so forth, was driven, as we know, not from a place of anti-diversity and inclusion. It was driven from women thinking that men are dirty and don't want to share a toilet with them. I think that's true. I don't think all that stuff on there was about, we can't have these toilets. It's pretty much, I don't want to share with a bloke. But we're getting these kind of facilities in. And it is important, and the reason it's important, and I know this as a parent with a child, is if you are, particularly if you're a child or a teenager, if you're transgender, you do not like going to the toilet. So with our son, we'd go out with him to restaurants and things, and we would have to do a recce to the toilet to find out what kind of toilet it was. If it was a kind of gender neutral toilet where anybody can go, it's just a kind of normal sit down poo, great, then he can go to the toilet. But if it's got male and female, he will not go, because he might still have the appearance of a female because the testosterone is not kicked in yet, but doesn't want to go necessarily into the female toilet because people say, oh, should you be in here? And he absolutely doesn't want to go into the gents, because if the cubicles are being used and it's only urinals for various biological reasons, he'd have difficulty using those urinals with any degree of accuracy. Not impossible, just might be a bit of a mess. So what would happen is, and he wouldn't do this at college either, is he wouldn't go. But the problem is, if you don't go to the toilet when you need to go, that can actually affect you going to the toilet for the rest of your life. It becomes a physical restriction on your bladder, and you find then that you get medical problems just because you don't go to the toilet, because you don't feel you can. It is ridiculous that we have that. So gender neutral facilities are absolutely the way forward. If you don't like them, take in your own wipes, that's what I say, and clean the seat before you sit down. Like we do with the computer screens now that we're all, flexibly working. Just do that. Gender neutral uniforms and forms. Names and pronouns is a big thing there. So my signature has my pronouns on it. I encourage you to have your pronouns on it. Why would you have your pronouns on it? For some people, they kind of have to announce their pronouns, sometimes kind of before they go to the room or before they're met, so that they aren't kind of misgendered. So people don't call them by the wrong name, because that's just really embarrassing if it happens. And if you come in, I always say this, if you go into, say, man or woman, go to a restaurant and sit down, and the waiter comes up to the man and says, excuse me, madam, what would you like to eat? And keeps calling that man madam all through the meal, that man is going to get pissed off. He's going like, no, why do you call me madam? It's kind of horrible there, and it happens. You wouldn't want it to happen to you. So some people are obliged, because of their nature, their transgenderness and so forth, to put their kind of pronouns out there. Inclusion says, well, there's no big deal to put your pronouns out there, so I can do that as well. You're not the only one in our entire department who is obliged to put your pronouns out there. I will as well. So I encourage you to put your pronouns out there, and we're going to really push them into our network soon to get people's pronouns on there. Okay? Even if you think there's nobody could mistake you for anything other than a man, putting your pronouns out there helps people, even people you will never meet, you're helping. What a great thing that is. I've talked about misgendering, common workplace issues, and unconscious bias. We talk about unconscious bias. Obviously, some people think that many biases would be quite conscious. Inappropriate questions, that's another thing that we talk about, which is if somebody is transitioning or you work with systems, it's not appropriate necessarily to ask them about their bits and pieces, because you wouldn't do that necessarily. If you did work in office with a man, you wouldn't necessarily, I'm not ruling this out, having seen you, you wouldn't necessarily go up to them, so, is your penis 7 inches, or is it 5? Because we were thinking 5, Peter was thinking 7. You don't generally do that. And if you do, fair enough. I'm not your parent, you do what you like. But some questions are inappropriate. If you wouldn't do that for somebody who's not transitioning, if somebody is transitioning, are those breasts real? Do you have a penis? Are you having it locked off? Highly inappropriate. Please don't do it. Okay? Even in the pub after work, don't do it. Okay? Even if it goes down well, I've tried. And then discrimination, which of course is something that nobody likes, and has happened obviously to transgender people who are transitioning, and it will disturb the workforce. You can't do that particular job, and so forth. And if I employ you, you're going to have lots of medical leave. So, it's almost like employing a pregnant woman. You just won't be here. We can't have that. So, these things have happened and do happen. And they've happened, I know from speaking to people in our agenda network who've been in the civil service in certain departments, where they're not able to get promotions, so they're not seen as suitable. And the only change is the fact that they're now transitioning to who they have always been. So it does happen and is happening. And outside the civil service, of course, everywhere we had the big LGBT survey. So if you remember that, you might not have done too, if you're LGBT. But the results came out, they were quite big there. massive amount of trans respondents saying they're facing, discrimination and negative and mixed reactions, and lots of things don't get reported. So that 36% is probably low. That's quite a big number of any group of people. Okay, so if you imagine a sector of society that's a minority, and 1 in 3 are being abused, that's huge. It's not like a one-off thing, it never happens. That's 1 in 3. Okay, that's really significant. And we need to note that. So society does need to change. And the civil service needs to change. Can anybody spot the odd numbers that go against the grain on that chart? Where does it go a bit freaky? So during the past 12 months, have you personally experienced discrimination at work in the civil service? Males 12, females 12%. We identify another way, 29%. Now, transgender men, 18%. Transgender women, 23%. Why is that different? Well, the thing that I would say is, this is just from my experience talking to people and others, and with my children, is society has more of an issue, seemingly, with a man choosing to be a woman and a man wearing a dress than it does potentially the other way round. Why? I don't know. Is it because we live in a masculine-based society? So if you actually chuck masculine away, there's something wrong with you? I don't know, but it is quite a big difference there. But the big thing, of course, is this, isn't it? Cisgender and transgender. And very quickly, cisgender and transgender. Have you heard the word cisgendered? You've had the same conversations. Okay, it's a linguistic term. It's I would say it's kind of like a meaningless term. It's a term that's introduced into the language a few years ago by a professor based on the fact that if you're going to say and talk about a transgender person, say a transgender woman or a transgender man, and in that same sentence or that same written word, or as you speak, you're talking about people who are not transgender, how do you describe the kind of other side of that coin? So, for instance, if you saw a photograph of 3 men walking down the road, and 2 of those men were white, and 1 of those men was black, and somebody said to you, describe that photograph, some people might say, there's 3 men walking down the road. Okay? Now, if you said, well, there's 2 men walking down the road with a black man, that's odd, isn't it? You haven't said there's 2 white men and a black man. You've said there's 2 men and a black man. Is the black man not a man? Now, in certain parts of America, in the South, Bob Dylan wrote that famous song. How many times was the man who walked down the road before he's called a man? Well, considered as man. So when you talk about a transgender man, and there are non-transgender people there, you say cisgendered. It creates that balance in your mind and in the sentence that that person is a valid man, just as that person's a valid man. They are trans, which means across, and cis, which is kind of Latin term, which kind of means the same. That's what it means. It's like the Olympics and the Paralympics. Yeah? Para means, alongside. Cis and trans. They're linguistic terms. If you're in a room full of people and none of you are transgender, you can say men or women because there's no transgender people in the room. But if you've got transgender people in the room, you wouldn't go. We wouldn't encourage you to go. There's men, there's women, and there's transgender men and transgender women in the room, suggesting they're another, not really men and women. You could say there are some cisgender people in the room, and there are some transgender people in the room. It's a linguistic term. Who did not understand that? See me later. You get that look because you're looking there. Fine, there. Just checking. Okay. Yeah, and that one as well, obviously. Have you experienced bullying and harassment at work during the past 12 months? Is also significantly higher for a cis to trans. So the civil service has an issue that we do employ people at all levels who are bullies. I've worked with bullies. There are lots of bullies around. Most people would be bullying transgender people and more than cisgender people. We have the data to prove it. So that's going to stop. Part of that is everybody being champions for this. Because we want you to be allies. And to do that, you act as a challenger, not a bystander. So if you're working with a transgender person or an intersex person and they are being abused and discriminated, you should say something. That's the rule nowadays. You shouldn't be passive. You should actually say something. You shouldn't bop the person on the nose. You might want to say something visibly in front of everybody, but you need to do something. Otherwise, nothing changes in society. Okay? So you've got to challenge inappropriate language and behaviour. And you yourself, as an ally, might make mistakes. You might say condition, which is a variation. What you got to do is you say, apologise, I'm not an expert, I'll try not to make that mistake again. It's okay, not to be perfect, it's fine. Right, I'm going to come to a close because the main attraction for today, in all her gloriousness, is Emma Dunn, the chair of Agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to technologically unplug this into there. Yes, I will. But I will go sit down. Okay, let's see. Where's your thing go? In there. That one? Yeah, that one. Let's have a look.
Oh, it's looking
It
like
works.
me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yay.
I will go.
Okay.
I will go and sit where you sit.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, Emma Dunn.
Right. Hello, everyone. Oh yes, I'm Emma Dunn. I've got here in my talk that I work for HM Land Registry. That's probably stretching it. I don't actually work for them. I used to. I've been a civil servant now for 22 years. That's my home department. I work for HM Land Registry. But in May, I was elected to the role of chair of the Agenda Network, and ever since then, this has been my job. I just come out and talk to lots of lovely people across government, and it's been absolutely brilliant. I'm based at the Filed Office in Wharton in Lancashire, and you've heard of Agenda? Excellent. The support network for trans and intersex staff across government. And I'm here to talk to you today about my genitals. Nervous laughter, that's my favourite response. Obviously, I'm not just going to talk to you about my genitals, I'm not a weirdo. So we are also going to talk about my line manager's genitals as well. Lovely. Okay, so the reason that I'm talking to you today is because I am intersex. I think Grant did the big reveal there earlier. It's true. But I want to know, does anyone have any idea what intersex means? We've kind of looked a bit at the gender bread person, haven't we? Does anyone, I'm going to pick on you. Do you want to have a guess or like tell us what you might think?
I think intersex is for someone who's born with kind of both genitals or kind of like a mixture of the two.
I always hope that that's going to be the explanation, that somebody's going to say it's people who are born with both genitals, because I always want to like live the dream and go, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Sadly, it's not. Imagine how popular I'd be at parties, though. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's here, get the loot. Fortunately, nobody gets both. What happens is when a fetus is developing, and we'll talk more about this later, but you get a set of structures, and those structures either become male, or they become female, or they kind of end up somewhere in the middle, and they can be ambiguous. But nobody gets both sets, and that's the reason why the term hermaphrodite is actually pejorative. Hermaphrodites are mythical creatures that have both sets of genitals. No human being has ever been that lucky. So sorry to, I'd love you to live the dream and think that I've got both, but I haven't. So yeah, intersex people are born with a mixture of anatomical sex traits. It's all got a bit A-level biology, hasn't it? Anatomical sex traits. Anyone want to have a guess at what they might be? We have talked about some of them already. Yes?
That would just be penis, vagina.
So genitals, that's one of your anatomical sex traits. What are the other things that make women and men's bodies different from each other? Your brain. Glands? What sort of glands? Oh, your chest. Okay. So your chest development is one of the things that we refer to as secondary sex characteristic. It's absolutely one of them. But your secondary sex characteristics are the ones that appear at puberty. So they are the things like your height, your body shape, your facial hair, your voice pitch, all of those wonderful things that appear at puberty. They are all secondary sex characteristics, and that's definitely one of the categories. There's a few more. Anyone want to think?
Reproductive organs.
Internal reproductive organs, fabulous. There's another one. Anyone for any more? Hormone structure, yeah, we tend to be different levels of hormones between men and women. What's the last one? Got this one more really obvious one. Chromosomes. We tend to see that men and women have different chromosomes. We tend to see women having XX chromosomes, and we tend to see men having XY chromosomes. Are we all familiar with that? Right, fabulous. Now, intersex people are born with a mixture of these anatomical sex characteristics that don't fit our typically binary ideas about male and female bodies. And if you think about it, because there's 5 things that go into making you male or female, there's lots of ways in which one of those things might not quite line up with all of the others. So what that actually means is there's lots of ways to be intersex. You're going to hear my story today. Please don't go away thinking that you've now heard all that there is to know about intersex people. You haven't, you've just heard my story. Other intersex people might have lots of different stories. So yeah, it's not a single category. Intersexuality may or may not be accompanied by various degrees of gender dysphoria, not feeling like the sex that you were recorded at birth. If you think about it, if your body is not actually binary, somebody's had to make a choice about how to record you. You get 42 days in England and Wales to record the birth of a baby, and you've got a choice of 2 categories. There's no other options. So somebody's made a choice to assign you into one of those categories. There's every chance that if your body isn't actually binary, you might grow up with an identity that doesn't match the category that you were recorded as. It makes sense, doesn't it? So yeah, much higher levels of gender dysphoria for intersex people. What you do need to know is that intersexuality is a perfectly natural and normal variation of human development. This is not a new thing, it's not bad, it's not a phase. I'm not jumping on a 20 bandwagon. As long as there have been human beings, there have been intersex people. We just haven't talked about them. So many people are unaware that babies can be born in a category that isn't entirely male or female. So here is something to think about. And I think, again, Grant has stolen my thunder on this one. When a baby's born, how do we decide what sex the child is? Yes, we look at the genitals. Absolutely fantastic. But as we've just talked about now, genitals are only one of those 5 things that go into making somebody male or female. So what does that mean? Now, I told you I was going to talk to you about my line manager's genitals. This is Danny. I'm a lucky girl. Danny is my line manager at HM Land Registry. The first time I ever did one of these talks, it was in Sheffield in front of loads of people, and I was really nervous. And so Danny came with me for moral support, and I repaid him by talking to the room about his genitals. He was so embarrassed, it was brilliant, and I felt obliged to use him as part of my talk ever since. What do I know about my line manager's genitals? I'm sensing that that's the question that we don't like an answer to, especially Danny. And the answer is that I know that Danny was assigned male at birth. So I know that at birth, Danny must have had a penis. But that's all I know about Danny. I mean, presumably, unless he's been particularly careless or unfortunate, he's probably still got one. But that's all I know about him. And knowing that he has a penis doesn't tell me anything about his chromosomes, his hormones, his internal reproductive organs. And I want you to think about that, because what that means is that every time you fill in a form at the bank, or you apply for a passport, or you take part in a survey, and you tell that organisation whether you are male or female, you are literally only telling them what genitals you have. It was the only thing that was used to assign you into one of those categories. So if you tell somebody which category you've been assigned to, that's all the information they get about you, what genitals you have. Isn't that wild when you think about it like that? Isn't it? And how often you get asked? I downloaded the Aldi app a few months ago as part of the installation process. I had to indicate by clicking on the box whether I was male or female. I thought, well, that's odd, Aldi. Do you need to know that I have a vagina before I can buy a dehumidifier and some stuff? seems a little bit intrusive, if I'm honest. Like, what are they doing with that information? Weird. Anyway, there are a number of different intersex variations. The variation I have is called Swire syndrome, which means that I physically developed along female lines, but genetically I am male. I have XY chromosomes. I like to say that I'm putting the XY into sexy. Thanks for laughing. If you are going to laugh at me, just bear in mind if I murdered you and left behind some DNA, the forensics people will be telling the police that the culprit was a man. Have a laughing. I was assigned female at birth. So what do you know about me now? Seriously, come on, people. We just talked about this. Thank you. So you know what my genitals are because you know how I was assigned at birth. Fabulous. And actually, I am lucky because my gender, who I am in my head, actually matches the category that I was assigned to at birth, even though that category is technically not accurate. I am not female. I am intersex. I'm going to have to do a bit more science stuff to explain my situation, and some of you might already know a lot of this, so I apologise in advance if you feel patronised, but here goes. When a baby is created, the egg is always an X chromosome. When an X chromosome egg is fertilised, the sperm is usually either an X or a Y chromosome, resulting in an embryo that is usually either XX or XY. XX embryos usually develop into girls, whilst XY embryos usually develop into boys. For the first 6 weeks, though, there is no actual differentiation, and we talked about this, didn't we? For the first 6 weeks, there's no differentiation because the embryo is too busy growing organs and basic structures that are common to both men and women. And apparently this is why men have nipples, because they're one of the things that's created at that early stage, just in case they're needed later on. One of the common organs that the embryo develops is a pair of gonads, and these are sex organs that have the potential at a later stage to become either ovaries or testes. At the 6 week stage, things start to get interesting. To use an analogy, at about this stage, the X chromosome from the egg starts to listen out for instructions from the sperm chromosome to make a boy. If the sperm chromosome is also an X, it stays silent. And in the absence of any instructions to the contrary, the embryo will develop along female lines. This is known as the Eve principle. It's considered by some to be evidence that females are the natural form of human beings and males are a sort of mutation. Sorry, cats. In order to develop along male lines, at the 6 week stage while the X chromosome from the egg is listening, the Y chromosome has to shout instructions to make a boy. And this is where things went wrong for me. Swire syndrome meant that my Y chromosome was doing its own thing. At the crucial 6 week stage, while my X chromosome was listening for a signal to make a boy, it heard nothing. And so 34 weeks later, my parents welcomed an apparently typical healthy baby girl into the world. My mum into that from it. And I've grown into the lips, which is of course, I wasn't a typical girl, but this would not become obvious until I reached my early teens. Can't buy style, can you? Apparently not. At 14, this is me at 14, I was living in Hastings in East Sussex, and my school nurse called me in for a random medical, and she asked me to stand a question about starting my period. And I told her I hadn't started yet. Now, this struck the nurses off because by complete coincidence, she'd actually had my little sister in for a medical a few weeks earlier. And my little sister, aged 12, had told the nurse that she'd started her period aged 10. She'd already had her period for 2 years. So the nurse knew enough about puberty to know that it normally runs in families. So she thought it was a bit odd that she had the 14-year-old big sister saying, no, I haven't got my period yet. So she referred me through my parents to a local clinic to get checked. The first thing that the doctor at that clinic wanted to do was examine me internally, but she found she wasn't able to. She in turn referred me to a consultant at the Royal East Sussex Hospital, the RESH, and the consultant then knocked me out and had a rummage. He discovered that I had a small piece of skin across the entrance to my vagina, a longitudinal vaginal septum, which effectively divided the entrance into two smaller openings, which was why the initial doctor had been unable to examine me. He removed this piece of skin while I was under the anaesthetic, and I only found out when I woke up. There was no medical reason for this. So essentially, I had genital mutilation surgery, courtesy of an NHS doctor. He told me it was just one of those things, but he continued to refer me for tests. Alarm bells were obviously ringing in his head. I remember that I was simply told that the tests were a continuing investigation into my lack of periods, and I remember one of the nurses being quite obnoxious about wasting their time because I was only 14 years old. And I remember having to explain to the nurse that it wasn't me who was pushing for these tests, it was the doctors. In truth, I was starting to worry though. All of my friends and my little sister had started by this point, and I felt a bit like the odd one out. And the fact that it was the doctors that were making a fuss meant that I suspected that I was right to be worried. A number of tests followed. After an ultrasound, I was sent a letter by the hospital telling me that my ovaries and uterus were a perfectly normal size and shape, and the tests carried on. And I want you to remember that letter. My ovaries and uterus were a normal size and shape. The final test involved taking blood for a chromosome count, and shortly after that test, something ominous arrived. An appointment at Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital here in London with a different consultant. I'll never forget that appointment. I was called into the room alone to be told that my ovaries had not formed properly, that I would never have children naturally, that because my ovaries were malformed, I would have to have surgery to remove them, that if I didn't, I could expect to get a particularly nasty cancer in the very near future if I didn't have it already, that I was lucky to have survived this far, that because I wouldn't have ovaries, I would have to have hormone replacement therapy, HRT, for the next 50 years, and that without the HRT, I would be in a wheelchair with osteoporosis by age 35 if I wasn't already dead from a heart attack, that I could try fertility treatment with a donated egg in the future, but the chances of success were slim, and it was simply one of those things. I remember bursting into tears. I'd believed that hospital letter that told me that my ovaries were fine, and I couldn't take it in. One of the nurses called my parents in. It might sound illogical, but I remember feeling sick with guilt as the doctor explained everything to my mum and dad. I felt responsible. I felt like I'd let them down. I'd never given them grandchildren. I wasn't normal. I wasn't healthy, and I'd failed them. I remember we were shown into a side room afterwards while the news sank in, and I remember apologising to my dad for letting him down. And my apology upset my dad so much that he cried, and it was the first time I'd ever seen my dad cry. I threw up in sync with shock. My mum was in tears. It was pretty awful. Over the next few weeks, I alternated between despair, shame, numbness, and rage. My mum walked into my room one day to find me punching myself. I hated myself and my body, and I felt like a complete failure. I grew up overnight. All of the things that normally preoccupy teenagers ceased to have any relevance to me. It felt like an entire potential future. Everything that I'd always just assumed would happen naturally one day, like marriage and kids, had all been snatched away from me before I'd even had the chance to decide if that might be something I'd want. I felt very, very low for a very long time. On my return home, I had to see my GP, who prescribed me the HRT on the instructions of the consultant. My faulty ovaries were scheduled for removal in the summer. I insisted on having the operation in the last week of term, before the summer holidays, because as far as I was concerned, if I had to go through something so crappy, I wasn't prepared to do it entirely on my own time. Not my brightest move, since the following year was my GCSEs, but I don't think my parents or the school had the heart to argue. I had the operation in the July of 1991 here in London at the Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital, and I felt really alone being in London so far away from home and friends and family. Although my lovely mum came to visit me every day on the train, and my dad came to visit me at weekends, and it was 10 days before I was allowed home. It was a big surgery. It was nothing was done laparoscopically in those days. I've got a massive scar. Throughout all of this, no further explanation was given for what was wrong with me other than your ovaries didn't develop properly. It just happens sometimes. When I asked if my condition had a name, I was told it was called gonadal dysgenesis, which is a fancy Latin way of saying your ovaries didn't develop properly. But the consultant was being evasive. Wire syndrome is a form of gonadal dysgenesis, but it is specifically known as XY gonadal dysgenesis, and he omitted the XY part. After the operation, things calmed down a bit. I continued to visit a consultant in London every few months as the HRT needed a lot of fine-tuning, and I also had to have my bone density measured and lots of other tests. By the time I was 15, I was travelling up on the train on my own and navigating the underground like a born Londoner. and then another upheaval. My dad got a new job, and we had to move from Hastings to Blackpool. The move meant that it was too far for me to travel to London so frequently, so my consultant at Queen Charlotte's in Chelsea transferred me to the care of a new consultant at Liverpool Women's Hospital. She was the nearest specialist to our new home, an amazing lady who was at that point a consultant by the name of Anne Garden, but who over the course of the next 18 years eventually became Professor Garden and my friend. Life carried on, and so did my studies. One of my A-levels was in psychology, and I remember one of the topics in my textbook was on intersex variations, namely Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome, and I remember reading about these, and something resonated. A lot of the symptoms that they were talking about in the textbook sounded similar to mine. At this stage, I still had no proper name for my diagnosis and no idea that I was intersex. The textbook talked about the chromosomes of intersex people, though, and I remembered that the last blood test that I'd had before that first Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea appointment was a chromosome count. So I knew that that test must have revealed something decisive. I started to research into sex variations, but it was incredibly difficult. This was long before smartphones or tablets, giving away my age here. We had a shared PC at home, but only dial-up internet. Does anyone remember the joys of dial-up internet? Wasn't it brilliant, eh? Mum yelling at you to get off the PC when she wants to ring your Auntie Carol. You know, she's ringing Auntie Carol, it's going to be 3 hours before you get the PC back. Brilliant. No Wikipedia. It sounds like the Dark Ages, doesn't it? No Wikipedia, nothing like that. After a while, I gave up. None of the intersex variations that I read about sounded exactly like mine, so mostly I put the idea out of my head. A few years passed with only fitful research on my part. I think really I didn't want to know. But in the end, one day I stumbled across the description of Swire syndrome and every symptom fitted. Bingo. I felt sick, but I kept the discovery to myself until my next appointment with Professor Garden, and then I asked her straight out if I had Swire syndrome. She looked astonished, but she immediately confirmed I was correct. This was why my ovaries hadn't developed properly. They were supposed to be testes. It's also why I'm so tall. My Y chromosome carries functioning genes for male height. My body is male. I have a male vagina. Like if you on a cellular level, I am male. I felt numb. She explained to me that it wasn't the usual practice for doctors to give intersex people an intersex diagnosis for many reasons, but mostly because they think it's too shocking. I had to say I disagreed. If I'd have been told straight away that I was intersex and that this was perfectly normal, perhaps I wouldn't have spent so long feeling like a complete freak. I could have joined a support group to help me get through all the medical stuff instead of having to cope on my own at 14 years old. And perhaps I wouldn't have felt so guilty and so embarrassed and so ashamed. I asked Professor Garden if I could have a copy of the chromosome results, and she said she'd have a copy sent to me. You saw them in the earlier slide. Those are my chromosomes. I returned home for a very difficult conversation with my parents. And I want you to put yourself in my shoes there for a minute. I can remember I'd been about 21, 22. I had to walk into my parents' house, my parents stood in the kitchen, mum cooking, and having to explain to my parents that the person that they thought was their daughter for the last 21, 22 years, not even female. You can imagine the kind of questions that they had. I couldn't answer them. I didn't know anything. I was just as shocked as they were. It was like a really traumatizing all over again. And there was no support. There was nothing. I figured it out myself. And of course, when I did figure out the truth, there was no counselling, no support, nothing, not even from my mum and dad. They had no idea. They'd never been told. Several years have passed since then. So where am I now? Well, to borrow a phrase from Facebook, it's complicated. For many years, I took HRT tablets daily to protect my bones and my heart, but I developed a resistance to the drugs. I took a huge and ever-increasing dose, but my hormone levels kept falling. Unfortunately, this huge dose wasn't without side effects, despite my apparent resistance. Every month on the first day of my new cycle, I woke up with an horrific migraine and I couldn't stop vomiting. I also experienced some other awful side effects. In the first week of each month, my feet and ankles swelled really badly. 1 month, my right foot swelled so badly that the skin on top started to split. And I often had a horrible metallic taste in my mouth. I find cake helps. I then tried patches. Every 3 or 4 days, I had to stick a small clear piece of film on my bum slowly released hormones through my skin. I would try not to scratch this in public, but I would sometimes find myself impersonating a bear to its favourite tree. And these didn't raise my hormone levels high enough either. The next brainwave was to fit me with a coil, which would release progesterone and allow me to have the estrogen delivered in a gel. The appointment to fit the coil took place on the 2nd of May this year. It was not a success. As is typical for somebody with Swyer syndrome, I had a very small and underdeveloped uterus. Remember that hospital letter? It was a complete lie. They literally, and I've still got the letter, they lied to me and said that the results of the ultrasound were fine and normal, and nothing was fine and normal. The consultant who was fitting the coil, I discovered, was ignorant of this important piece of information about people like me. She told me that she couldn't get the device through my cervix. After I'd nearly fainted twice with pain, she fetched an ultrasound machine and a second doctor who managed to find an image on the screen and immediately yelled at the consultant to stop. Apparently the problem was not my cervix, which she'd actually got through. It was that she was trying to force the device through the top of my uterus. I managed to make it to my friend's flat outside the hospital before I collapsed. Thank goodness I have friends who actually live right by the hospital in Lancaster, so whenever I have an appointment, I park on their drive, and I managed to make it back to my car before I collapsed, and my friend's partner was home. And me and my husband and my friend and his partner all socialised together, we're all friends, and he knew my husband well enough to be able to ring him and tell him what had happened. And my poor husband, who was working in Warrington that day, had to drive home to Preston, get a train up to Lancaster and drive me home in my own car. I don't know what I'd have done if my friend's partner hadn't been home. And I'm not telling you this because I want pity or because I want sympathy. I don't. I'm telling you this because you need to understand that even now, 28 years after I was diagnosed in 2019, my intersex variation is still so misunderstood and so marginalised that I am routinely caused pain and trauma by the very people that I rely on to look after me. In addition to the estrogen and progesterone, I also have to have my testosterone levels topped up. Now, this might sound odd because there's this common misconception that, because we often see testosterone characterised as a male hormone. And actually, testosterone is the most abundant sex steroid in women throughout their lifespan. It's weird the way that we do this. We talk about male and female hormones. Hormones aren't male and female. Hormones are hormones. They're just like chemical compounds that occur in your body. You tend to have them in different levels. Men tend to have higher levels of testosterone. Women tend to have higher levels of estrogen. But actually, that higher level of estrogen is only through a very specific period of a woman's life. It's from puberty to menopause. If you actually look at lifelong levels, testosterone is the most abundant in women as well. It's weird how we characterise them as male and female, and we think about them in that way. Men have estrogen, women have testosterone. We just have them in different levels. And there's natural variation in that. And it might also sound odd that I have to have my testosterone levels topped up because you often have there's this common misconception that the presence of a Y chromosome confers an automatic advantage in terms of the production of extra testosterone. Has anyone seen all that nonsense in the papers with Castor Semenya not being allowed to run because of the levels of testosterone? Like it makes her something other than a woman to have those high levels. And we've got to test that athlete for a Y chromosome because there's this automatic thing that if we find a Y chromosome, they must automatically have this unfair advantage. And actually, it's completely untrue. If my Y chromosome produced testosterone, I'd be stood here with a male body. My Y chromosome doesn't produce it. So actually, I don't have any advantage in terms of sport, even though I have a Y chromosome. When I was first diagnosed, no thought was given to my testosterone levels because of this kind of thinking. It's a male hormone. But actually, about 10 years ago, that changed because they started to understand that typical women do have testosterone in small quantities. It's manufactured in the adrenal gland in tiny trace quantities, but also massively, much more by your ovaries. And I don't have ovaries. So, as I say, around 10 years ago, my consultant told me that the latest thinking was that Swire girls should have their testosterone levels checked. And so I gave some blood, and sure enough, my levels were low, much lower than typical women. and I needed topping up. The testosterone is difficult to administer though. No company manufactures tablets in a low enough dose for people like me who have a gender identity as female and want female levels of testosterone. So the only alternative is actually a slow release implant, which is currently only available in Australia. My consultant now has implants flown into England for me, and every 6 months I go to Lancaster Hospital where my consultants moved to have a procedure where they numb my belly, make an incision, pop in an implant and stitch me back up. You'll be pleased to know it does increase my sex drive, but the side effects also include increased moodiness, acne and facial hair growth. Every 6 months, my slightly nervous husband comes home to a spotty, mustachioed wife who is determined to have angry sex with him. Speaking of my husband, I am now happily married to somebody who knows the full story and who loves me anyway. It is a happy ending I never expected, as my condition has cost me several relationships. I've not told many ex-boyfriends about my intersex status, but there's no hiding the scars, the daily HRT, the monthly vomiting. So I've always had to give them a vague reason, and usually I just say, oh, I had my ovaries removed when I was a teenager. And actually often it's been my infertility that's been the deal breaker. I'd all but given up hope of meeting someone until Tom came along. As usual, at first I gave him a vague story and I said, oh, it's complicated. But as the months went by, I started to realise that eventually I was going to have to come clean. He wasn't put off by my infertility. Whilst he loves kids, he couldn't eat a whole one. And he never had a burning desire for any of his own, so I knew it might end up being serious, and I was going to have to tell him eventually for my own conscience. When I finally came clean, we were actually on holiday in Portugal. The topic came up, so I seized the moment. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I sobbed my heart out from beginning to end. I was absolutely convinced that I was going to be flying home alone when he found out the truth. But he just gave me the biggest cuddle. He told me afterwards that because of all the clues, he actually wondered if I might be trans or something. And if so, he didn't care. He loved me so much that all he wanted was to be with me. This from a builder from Wigan. I think I knew then I was going to marry him. There have been lighter moments too. This is where I tell myself it's fine because I'm never going to see any of you ever again. Many people think that being intersex means that you must look androgynous or have ambiguous genitals. But this is not true, as one doctor was surprised to learn. Oh yes, buckle up folks, because I once had to tell a gynecologist that I was intersex in the middle of a smear test. He looked astonished and stared at me in open-mouthed amazement, which is really what you want, isn't it? When he finally gathered himself, he spluttered in confusion, but you're anatomically perfect. Don't get me wrong, girls, I'm not a stranger to a compliment. I'm just not usually in spirit. Under a terror-what line. This statement, accompanied by an expression of horror from a gynecologist who was at that moment knuckle deep inside me, was so funny that I absolutely convulsed with laughter. Unfortunately, in his shock, he'd loosened his grip on the speculum. And as I laughed, it shot out of me and clattered to the floor. This set the nurse behind him into hysterical laughter, and the pair of us wept helplessly as he fumbled around to retrieve it. When I finally got my breath back, I asked him if I could have anatomically perfect put on a certificate. He looked so embarrassed that it just set me and the nurse up into hysterical laughter again. I'm definitely much more militant about my intersex status these days. At first, I felt like I shouldn't say that I was intersex, since as intersex variations go, I have been incredibly fortunate. I am female on my birth certificate, I look female, I identify as female, and I'm in what appears to the rest of you to be a heterosexual relationship. So it might seem a bit melodramatic to insist that I'm not female but something else. I think the reason that I've started to speak up more now is because I've recognised that I am one of the lucky ones. There are other intersex people out there with different traits who are subjected to horrifying and traumatic human rights abuses. Some who are born with ambiguous genitals are surgically altered in infancy to make them fit into a binary sex category chosen for them by a doctor, and which they may not grow up to identify with. And of course, if they don't, they've already had surgery. It's much more difficult to put somebody back the other way. Our bodies are pathologized. We are made to feel stigma and shame, and our intersex diagnoses are routinely withheld from us, which denies us the agency to make informed decisions about our own health care. We're constantly having to fight for our right not to be erased from society, and we have no specific protection in legislation. Being intersex is not a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, and you cannot meaningfully identify yourself in any legal way in this country as being intersex. I could have been sacked several times. You can imagine my sick record. I could have been sacked several times over by HM Land Registry. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to work for A, a civil service organisation, and B, a specific agency within the civil service that actually wanted to support me, not because they had to, but because it was morally and ethically the right thing to do. I count my lucky stars every day that I'm a civil servant. I really do. The more voices who speak up about these abuses, the more educated everybody becomes, and the better our lives are going to get. I had to enrol with a new GP recently when I moved house, and I had to fill out several forms. And practically, the first box on the first form was to tick a box to indicate whether I was male or female. I angrily drew a third box, put intersex next to it, and ticked that box. My new GP was going to know that I was intersex anyway from my notes, so I felt like I had nothing to lose. And I was so angry that in this day and age, the medical profession is still trying to categorise people according to a sex binary when we've known for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that not everybody fits into one of those categories. As Lauren Mayano from Our Proud Families puts it, the problem is not the people who don't fit into that binary, it's a binary that doesn't fit who people are. Something that I find difficult to deal with is that having Swire syndrome is incredibly lonely. As we've said, about 1.7% of the population are thought to be intersex. That makes it as common as red hair or green eyes. But estimates for people with Swire syndrome fall into the region of about 1 in 80,000 people, far fewer than some of the other intersex variations. So I don't think I'll ever meet anyone else with the same thing as me. It's so rare that very little research is done on it, and most doctors have never even heard of it. My consultant says that she treats one other person with Swire syndrome at her clinic, but doesn't know of anyone else. I sometimes look around the waiting room while I wait for my implant, trying to work out if there's another tall girl sat in one of the chairs. And if there is, I'm sat there going, "Oh, is it you?" The way that I was treated and spoken to by many professionals during my diagnosis made me feel guilty and ashamed about my intersex status for many years. But being a member of Agender and also HM Land Registry's Assured network, which is our LGBTI network, has made me accept and even be proud of who I am. Joining Agender and meeting a group of people who actually celebrated me for who I was gave me the courage to be open about myself and the challenges that I and other intersex people face. I think my self-acceptance became complete when my lovely dad died in May of last year. Suddenly, that pesky Y chromosome that I inherited from him started to seem a lot more precious. After he died, my mum was clearing out a lot, and she found a bundle of correspondence from when I was first diagnosed, and amongst it all was the results of that original chromosome test all those years ago, the ones that you've seen on the screen. I've now had my XY chromosomes tattooed on my wrist, and some of my dad's ashes have been mixed with the ink. It symbolises how proud I am to be his daughter, and it reminds me that every day, in every sense of the word, a bit of my dad is always with me. My dad was an absolute belter. He was my biggest champion. He was my biggest supporter. And when I found out that I had Swire syndrome and it was because of a faulty gene on a chromosome that he gave me, I never let him forget it. I pulled his leg endlessly. And my dad always said that he'd done it deliberately because he really wanted a girl. He was brilliant. And he also gave me the lips, so, you know, every time. I have to say that these days I started to find it quite liberating to embrace my Y chromosome. Someone recently accused me of being unladylike. I shrugged and replied, well, I'm not female, and walked off. I like being a tall girl too, although finding clothes that fit can sometimes seem impossible. And I should also add that my parents planned to call me Simeon if I was a boy, so I definitely couldn't go there. Apologies to any Simeons in the room, anyone with a Simeon in the family. It's a beautiful name, it's just not for me. Anyway, I've talked about myself for long enough, so I'm just going to say I'm going to end here, and I'm just going to say thank you for listening. If anyone wants to speak to me afterwards or drop me an email, I think we've got a bit of time for Q&A, haven't we? So if anyone wants to speak to me afterwards or drop me an email, you are more than welcome. I'm happy to pass on my contact. Well, saying I'm happy to pass on my contact screen. You're also welcome to follow me on Twitter. If you're looking for things that you can do to be an intersex ally, I tweet a lot about intersex issues. But don't just follow me, go and find other intersex people, follow them, hear about the kinds of things that are happening in the community and the kinds of challenges that we're facing, and how to be a good intersex ally. Thank you all very much for your time and for making me so welcome. Thank you.
Okay, guys, thanks for that. I did say my appetite for this, made and cry, everybody parts. I fit all three of those, I think, essentially. I've been able to speak before, so for some of you it's the first time. So some of you are looking like you have some emotion. That's good. It's important to realise there's real people. So if there's any questions, because we've got 20-25 minutes. I don't think we've talked about anything we haven't talked about.
Do you think that the ongoing marginalisation of intersex is in part at least due to society's fear of the male and female tick box system being broken down somehow?
Yes, absolutely. People like things to be nice and neat and tidy and clear cut, and there's that cognitive dissonance for a lot of people when they find out that there are people like me in the world who can't clearly fit into one of those categories. And like I say, I don't fit into those categories in one way, but then there's other intersex people who have lots of other ways that they don't fit into that box. There's intersex people out there who have an ovary and a testicle, and it's, you know, they kind of divided down the middle sort of thing. And like the idea that there's just no, I think a lot of people think it's a magic bullet for, you know, because when you argue with bigots online, which I like to do, you hear those really simplistic arguments about if you've got a penis, you're a man, and if you've got a vagina, you're a end of, you know, those kind of people. And for some people, especially if they're arguing about sport, then the thing that defines people is not the penis and vagina anymore. It's whether you've got XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes. And they'll change the thing that defines you according to the argument that they're having at the time. But it's because people just can't, they have that real cognitive dissonance that there's not those neat little boxes that you can put people in. And yes, I think that that's one of the huge problems. And it's self-perpetuating because the longer you marginalise intersex people, the longer people are not going to understand that intersex people exist, the longer people like me are going to have their diagnoses withheld from them. I shouldn't even know that I'm intersex. If my consultant had had his way, I would have just thought I was broken and damaged and not good enough, and I wouldn't have realised that actually what I have is a natural genetic variation that just makes me a little bit different. And we've got to normalise the idea that that we exist in society.
Any other questions?
So obviously the intersex come with other lifelong health considerations. Is that true for the majority of intersex people?
It's a really interesting question. Thank you for asking that. So the surgery that I was given, and I don't make this clear in my talk, the surgery that I was given was really precautionary. There is no real evidence that I needed to have my gonads removed. There's no good sound scientific evidence that says what kind of risk I had of developing the cancer. Gonadoblastoma is the cancer that I was told I might get if I left my gonads in situ. So there's and nobody does the research, and again it's this whole medical thing and social thing of just having men and women, and so you are just operated on to make you men and women who are not liable to, you know, if they think there's even a slight chance, they'll operate on you. So as I understand it, yes, there are definitely medical variations, intersex variations that have other medical stuff that run alongside it. But how much of that is a real concern, and how much of that is just a kind of manufactured panic by doctors who don't want to be sued, you know, for getting it wrong, is really hard to tell. Really hard to tell. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, I mean, you don't see it in this country because obviously we have the NHS, but you can certainly go. I mean, look at the Laurie Hospital in Chicago in America. They actually advertise normalizing surgeries for little girls. And I invite you to consider how disgusting that is, that you can think of somebody as needing to be normalized. I mean, like, we literally do it to nobody else in society. We don't operate anyone else on anyone to make them fit into society so that society accepts them. Like, if somebody was born with anything else, we don't go, oh, well, society's racist, so we're going to bleach the skins of people of colour, there's literally no other group and no other people that are surgically altered to make them acceptable to society, but it happens to intersex people routinely. The disgusting thing about the surgeries actually is that what we find is that the surgeries are predominantly feminizing surgeries, and the reason for that is nothing to do with the expectations of how that infant is going to identify when they grow up. It's because those feminizing surgeries are simply easier to perform. There's no other consideration. Intersex activists, and I'm not an activist, I'm not allowed to be an activist because I work for government, but intersex activists have a joke which sounds, or a bit of dark humour phrase, which sounds hilarious until you actually consider the reality of what it is that they're saying. And we say that it's easier to dig a hole than put up a pole. Yeah, and then you actually think about what that means for the individual. And the awful thing about feminizing surgeries is that they will involve a vaginoplasty, which is the creation of a vagina. And if you have a vaginoplasty, part of the healing process is that newly created vagina will have to be penetrated by a dilator several times daily. We're doing this to infants. I was in hospital when I had my gonadectomy. I was in a hospital bed diagonally opposite from a girl who was having a vaginoplasty, and she told me how she was taken out of that room every day by the doctors and held down while she had dilators put inside her. And then she said there was one nurse that seemed to enjoy it. And I think about her all the time. And I know she's never ever going to stand up in a court and bring those people to justice for what they did for her, because that stigma and shame and trauma that she's going to carry for the rest of her life. These are literal human rights abuses that intersex people are being forced under. And a lot of people, so I only had gonads removed. So my gonads were not one thing or the other, but there are intersex people who are like me. They have an externally female body, but actually internally they do have testes. And if you remove those testes, what that does is it effectively sterilizes you. So that's literally a human rights abuse against the European articles on human rights, and it just, but because doctors are doing it and it seems to be an okay thing, it happens all the time.
And just on that point about doctors making those decisions, as we said, a lot of those people will grow up with an identity that's male, like you do, but their bodies have been feminized and don't fit their identity. That person is therefore may choose transition because they are transgender.
Yeah, that's how a lot of intersex people also end up as transgender, because of that whole thing of, well, I was assigned one way, but actually my identity is the other way. And actually, once you've had the surgery, like I say, it then actually becomes a lot more hard for you to have further surgeries to put you all the way back the other way. You know, once you've had something removed, you can't have it stitched back on. So yeah, it's really, you have to be our allies. You have to. There's so few of us. You have to be our allies in this. You have to understand those human rights abuses. You have to understand that those non-consensual surgeries are happening. You have to understand that we're not protected in legislation. You have to understand that we're being discriminated against in the workplace. And you have to understand that we're everywhere. We're sitting next to you on the bus, we're sitting next to you in the office, we're serving you coffee, we're walking past you. You know, we're everywhere. But nobody's told that they're intersex. They don't know that they're intersex. They're not fighting for intersex rights. They're all carrying around this huge thing of stigma and shame, and that they've been altered. and they just think they're the only person. I thought I was the only person in the world who had what I had. I'd never heard of anybody else who had not developed ovaries. I just thought I was a freak.
Okay, thank you very much. But I want to ask you a few more questions. Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just interested to know in terms of the to feel like no experience from coherent community or
No, and so I absolutely see those communities as having kind of massive intersectional overlap, because there's lots of issues that are the same. We're both damaged. For example, the kinds of rhetoric that Grant was touching on about how we are suspicious of trans women, and trans women are the Trojan horses of patriarchy, and they're just men who are putting on dresses so that they can go into female spaces and rape women and molest children and all the disgusting things. And sex is binary and it's biological and it's immutable. And of course, those arguments absolutely throw the intersex community under the bus. And in actual fact, the kinds of treatments that we have are very similar to each other. The kinds of hormone therapy that I'm having are meaningfully no different to the kinds of hormone therapies that a trans woman might have. And there's really interesting odd parallels as well, if you think about it. So the kinds of surgeries that are being imposed on intersex kids without their consent and unnecessarily are often no different to the kinds of surgeries that trans people are crying out for and being denied. So you've got one group of people that are forced into these surgeries against their will, and another group of people who are desperate for them and can't have them. I think the only kind of friction that we see between the communities is that often when people are arguing against that anti-trans rhetoric, so when they're arguing with somebody who's saying sex is binary and biologically immutable, intersex people tend to be used as a bit of a gotcha, and they go, well, that's not true because intersex people exist. And the unfortunate thing about that is that that's the only time we are ever mentioned, and it's not good enough. I'm absolutely fine with being used in an argument like that, but please don't let that be the only time that you ever talk about an intersex person, talk about the surgeries, talk about the human rights abuses, talk about the problems that we face as a community. Don't let that be the only issue that like the only time that we ever come out now is that when you're arguing against these anti-trans.
I mean, I would say, listening to you about those unnecessary surgeries, I'm now reflecting on the fact that my son, who's 23 now, he's not had his top surgery yet. He wants to have top surgery to remove his boobs. But what the doctors told us, gave us advice on what's happened, and I'm reflecting on that because I didn't do an investigation, is they said because he got ovaries and because he didn't put on the testosterone when he was 17, they said our advice is he has to have a complete hysterectomy. We said earlier this year, do you want a hysterectomy? They're saying you should, because apparently the testosterone causes issues with the ovaries and there's a massive chance of cancer. So he had a hysterectomy, my son, earlier this year. And now I'm sitting here thinking, do we need to do that? Or were we just told by the medical profession there's this big risk of cancer? I don't know what to do now, because you can't put it back. So I have to do some investigations now, which I hadn't done, because I had relied on the medical advice of the doctors to say, this is our advice, and he's over 18, so he has to make a choice anyway. But I do feel if we'd said, can we just investigate further and pushed, perhaps it wasn't necessary surgery. So I'm a bit worried now. As sitting here now, that's an issue, I think, that these issues are real for people now.
Sorry, there's the lady over here who had a hand raised as well.
Yeah, I think I'm taller than you. That's just enough.
Oh, was that it? Okay, thank you. And your lips are probably better as well. Damn it, you can get out. How tall are you? Oh, I'm 6 foot. Tiny socks, love. Yeah. All right, now I'm 6 foot tall.
But I have given birth normally. So
right, so you're probably not intersex.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so my mum and dad, so my mum's 5'9", which was pretty tall for a woman of her generation, and my dad was the same. He was 5'9", which was very tall for someone in his family. And then my sister's probably about 5'7", and I'm 6 foot. So in all of like our adult family photos before my dad died, I just looked like I'd eaten the other 3 like there was another 3 children that came after me that I just eaten. like the cuckoo in the nest. Like there's like 3 normal people and then me. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It makes you feel really part of the family.
Always trying to be portrayed in that way. aren't
Yes,
they?
that's it.
Because they're
I
both
just
away
want you
because
to
of
choose
you.
that part. That's it, no doubt. Sorry.
Well, so am I.
It is, I mean, surely.
I think the problem is that it's endometrial cancer, because this is why I've been told that I have to have progesterone, because if you don't have, sometimes you can convert testosterone into estrogen. Estrogen, if you have a womb, will build up the lining of the womb, and if you don't shed the lining of the womb, you are prone to endometrial cancer. So that might be the reason
That might
that
be
you
why.
were.
'Cause
But I'm
my
not a
son doesn't
doctor.
have
I'm not an
periods.
expert. That's a complete guess. I could be completely out.
That's one of those things you say as a parent as a child. You do say things like, "Oh yeah, my son used to be in the brownies," which is true. And I do say, like you just said just now, "Yeah, my son's not had periods for years," which is kind of one of those things. That you just,
Everyone else in the box.
yeah, your brain just has to kind of get used to this concept. There's another question over there.
So, I was on Twitter last night having a great time, and I noticed a particular trend, which was LGBT Alliance. And I was like, maybe that's a spelling error.
No,
It was not.
no, it wasn't.
Do you have any advice for how the LGBT community, including and I, can tackle transphobia?
So I think what we need to start looking at is the kinds of alliances and commonalities that happen between those communities. So we know that a lot of intersex people are themselves part of the LGB community because of the fact that they're intersex. I mean, like, how would you think about this? I'm intersex. I'm in a relationship with a man. How would you describe that relationship? Am I heterosexual? I'm like, do you see? But this is my point. So, like, as an intersex person who's not male or female, I'm in a relationship with a man. Does that make me? Am I gay? Am I a gay person in a relationship because I'm XY and he's XY? Or, you know, is it that I'm in a heterosexual relationship because I've got a vagina and he's got a penis? You know, like, so it's kind of understanding that a lot of intersex people. Sorry, was that,
Who knows?
who knows? No, he's got a penis, I know. I definitely know. But no, it's kind of understanding that a lot of intersex people, because of the fact that they're intersex, are going to have relationships that are going to be seen by the world as being L or G or B relationships. It's understanding that the kinds of surgeries that are given to intersex infants. You think about, we've talked about feminizing surgery. What's that surgery for? It's so that when they grow up, because they're a little girl, it's so that when they grow up, they can have penetrative sex with a man, because of course they're going to be straight. So it's those kinds of homophobic, heteronormative ideas that we have about little girls growing up to be in a relationship with somebody with a penis, that are meaning that these surgeries are being forced onto these girls. They might grow up to be a lesbian. They might even still identify as a girl, but go, well, actually, I'm a lesbian, so I don't actually see the need to surgically create a vagina when I'm in a relationship with another woman. I don't actually need one that badly. You know, but there's this is automatic assumption that they're going to grow up to need a vagina to have a healthy sexual relationship. So it's kind of, and there's loads of things that when you actually look, so that like the whole patriarchal thing that we were talking about how trans women are much more vilified than trans men, and actually patriarchy harms everybody. It harms women and it harms men. You know, we see the rates of suicide for men are massively higher than they should be, and a lot of that is because of this idea that you have to be big and strong and testosterone and manly, and you know, it damages everybody. All of these ideas. So it's I guess it's just identifying all of those kind of commonalities that those communities share, and by recognizing how when you are allies with everybody, your voices are much louder. You're much more, you've got a much louder voice if you. What's the one about, you know, united we stand, and about like lions with, you know, all of that sort of stuff.
I'll just pick up on that LGBT Alliance. Basically, it's been born from Stonewall, the charity introduced trans 3 years ago. They just used to focus on LGBT issues. Some of the founders of Stonewall weren't actually very comfortable or happy about being trans, so they set up a separate organisation. My feeling is I'm hoping it will just kind of burn out and it's reflective of a kind of older school way of thinking about sex and gender. And I think actually, like we're saying, what we're seeing is as much as we want to be separate labels, they do help, but in the same way, I think what's really reassuring is younger generations, you know, there's research like 50% of young people identify as something other than a straight kind of thing. I think the term queer is becoming really prominent now, so then actually we are coming together more as a community from generally younger generations. There are, of course, older people that get it and support it as well. But I think this is just a bit of a people can't let go of those old ideas.
Rob, can I just mention Rob, because Rob's on our committee, he's in DFT, but where did you used to work, Rob? So he's kind of our little expertise. I've actually got an Emma story, because we're getting to the end there. Sorry, Emma, I don't know if you were told about this little story about you.
Okay.
When I went to this talk with the deputy chair of Agenda, who's a lovely lady called Steph, who's transitioning, or still is, works for Customs, has been for 40 years as a customs officer. We went to Public Health England recently, and I'd arrived, I was a bit late for my talk as a transgender parent, and Steph was doing the transgender 101 stuff, like the basics. And I sat at the back of this room full of kind of doctors and clinicians and others at Public Health England. And Steph kind of surprised me because she talked about you, Emma, as our new chair, and said Emma was intersex, and said Emma had XY chromosomes. I was just relaxing, waiting for my talk, and Steph just pointed at me. She said, "Grant," yes, they all turned to look at me. "You wouldn't describe Emma as masculine, would you?" And I went, "Not to her face."
Not twice.
Yeah. There's a question there.
Yeah. You said how the X chromosome for the signal from the Y chromosome, but the Y chromosome comes with the sonoplasty.
Yes.
Does that mean that the majority of intersex will present as female
No.
with the X chromosomes going forward?
No, a lot. So this is a really difficult question to ask, because in terms of the prevalence of each condition, yes, you will probably end up with more people who have what we think of as a typical female body, but that's because of the prevalence of a particular intersex variation called androgen sensitivity syndrome, where it's almost the mirror image of what I've got, which is where the Y chromosome is shouting its lungs out to make a boy, but the X chromosome is just doing its own thing, and just like la la la, making a girl. Not listening, whatever. Here's a girl. So yes, and so in terms of actual numbers, yes. But if you're talking about the kinds of variations no, there's like 30 or 40 intersex variations. And like I say, some of them are just so wild. It's just, I just think they're beautiful. I just think, nature is a beautiful, diverse, wonderful thing. But there's one, my favourite, which I think is just amazing, because I would have loved this, is one that's called, and the name's gone. It's got a D and a 5 in it. 5-alpha reductase deficiency. And you quite often get a baby that's born that looks female, but actually it's just because the Y chromosome was a bit lazy in the womb. But at puberty, the Y chromosome goes, "Wait a minute, I'm a boy," and goes absolutely crazy. And so you get children that appear to spontaneously change sex at puberty. So they go from being female to being male. And I think there's an island somewhere where that condition is actually, because it's hereditary, where that's passed on. And so they're really common about like they're really laid back, like, "Oh, well, we think it's a girl, but wait until they're 14, see if they've got a penis." Who knows? So they're really chilled out about it, because there's like loads of people who've got that genetic variation in their community. So, but yeah, like I say, there's so many weird and wonderful things that it's hard to say, or do they end up with a feminine body? Because those babies are born with a feminine body, but then become masculinized later on. So, did that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Good.
So if you research it, you'll be there looking through lots of medical pages. There are 40 different conditions, all with different variations as the conditions together.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this.
Yeah, she's very masculine.
I'm not, though, because aggression is not a masculine thing.
I know, I married my wife. Are there any other questions before I draw this to end? And thank you all for taking time out to come to this event and learn, and then pass that learning on. One more question. We'll ask a question.
We still did get to I can see it.
Only 40 range, and not all the others.
Oh, I don't know. I'm throwing numbers out.
Well, like
there.
deep. Well, it might be. I mean, I think what happens. I've done some research into it. There are different variations on variations. That's the thing.
It starts getting really complicated to actually nail down a number.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there are about 14 sort of like big ones that kind of we know about.
I was reading something the other day where they were kind of going, you know, it becomes a real thing when a male scientist is giving it a name.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So thank you, Dr. Swire, who, yeah.
Okay, right.
There's one more question. Go on, yeah.
I can't see because they're hiding.
So yeah, very fascinating talk. I think the thing I found the most shocking was the fact that your diagnosis was withheld from you.
Yeah.
Does that still go on nowadays?
I don't know, because obviously I only got diagnosed once. But I gave a talk for Ofsted earlier in the year, and one of the participants, one of the audience, was the mother of an intersex child, and that child had been given an intersex diagnosis, and they had been told about their chromosomes, and the word intersex had been used. And I just said, look, I get that this might feel like the most shocking and awful thing in the world to you right now, but actually they've done you a massive favour, because now you are empowered. You know what your child has. You can research it. You can meet other people with the same thing. You can put your child into a support group with others who've got the same thing as them, so they know that they're not a freak and they know that they're not alone, and all the rest of it. I think it does depend on where you are and which doctor you are. There's no medical thing that says you have to disclose. There's no medical guideline that says, yeah, absolutely. But it's all about the care of the patient, and if they judge you to be, you know, that you might be shocked by the idea that you're intersex, then that's all they have to consider. So they don't have to tell you. And obviously, for a lot of doctors, it's a routine thing that they go, but this person is 14 or 15 or whatever, or even younger, so we're not going to tell them. But equally, there are people who don't find out that they're intersex until adulthood because they have problems with their fertility, and that can be the time at which you're going to be working with people in your place of work who have found out that they are intersex while they are working here because of the fact that they've tried to start a family and who have been unable to, and they've gone and gotten intersex. So I think it's probably more likely that they would be told that they were intersex. So again, it's really difficult to sort of say, are people being told now? Because I think the answer is still, it depends on which doctor it is, where they are, how old the patient is, and all the rest of it. There was a gentleman in the paper the other day who had had 4 daughters and went for surgery on his appendix, and when they opened him up, they found a wound, and he was 70. So, you know, you can literally find out that you're intersex at any stage.
Isn't it negligence of the NHS not to tell you? Because you have had patients trying to get a toilet. If they'd known that.
Well, they did know. My consultant knew that I had Swire syndrome, but she just didn't know enough about it to know that it meant that I had an underdeveloped uterus. I knew, and I'd said to her, are you going to be able to do this? And she said, yeah, why wouldn't I be able to? And I was like, well, because of my uterus. And she was like, well, you've got a uterus. And I was like, well, yeah, but I thought Swire girls had like a really small uterus. She was like, oh, no, if you've got a uterus, you can have a coil. And it was like, no, apparently. The latest thing, this is really exciting, the latest thing is that they told me they're going to have another go at doing it. So you can imagine how excited I am. But what they've said to me is that they're going to grow my uterus before they put the coil. Now, I had business with a bike pump. But apparently what I have to do is take loads and loads of estrogen for ages, and that will grow my uterus. And then they'll put me on some withdrawal drugs that will give me the mother of all periods. And my husband has been told to invest in a crash helmet. But apparently after that, my womb will stay large and I will be able to have a coil fitted. So I'm thrilled about this. So, yeah. And I've got, you know, and I'm, you know, you think you're working with people who are going through this in the workplace, and these are the things we're going through. How many people do you think are just not, yeah, I've got flu. I've got flu. I've got a bug. And that's what, and weirdly, up until about like 2 years ago, that's what I would have done. I had loads of this happening all my whole life, and I was ringing up and going, yeah, I've got a bug, I've got flu, I've got this, that, and the next thing. And it wasn't until I came out in the workplace and was allowed to be myself and bring my whole self to work that actually I could start being up. Danny thinks it's brilliant because I'm like, oh, I've got a thing with me, Danny. And he's like, oh, God. So he's sick of hearing about it. But I can be honest with him now. And when that thing happened with the coil, I could ring up and I could actually say what has happened because he knew that I was sex. But until then, I'd have had to fudge it.
I will do this to a close because it's just gone 4. I would say, thank you for coming. Can we just thank Emma again for coming?
your lanyards, and got some application forms to join a gender, even better. Post off, or we can
I collect them.
you fill them in and collect them with as many numbers as we can. We have some of the LGBT rainbow lanyards for those who still aren't wearing one. Not that I'm pointing any fingers. Lots more on that side. I like that side. Then there's another one there. And if you're already in the LGBT network and because you came here, if you're honest, take one of the laptop stickers. But only if you're already in the network.
You're on the mailing list.
You're not on the mailing list. You're not having one. You can have whatever.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Here's the application form.
The leaflets for my gender.